Hello and welcome to the first ever ADHDvCon, brought to you by the Monoceros Initiative, a pending nonprofit.
My name is Jaylyn, and I'm an ADHD coach, podcaster, and speaker, as well as the president and co-founder of the Monoceros Initiative.
And I'm Ron Capalbo, ADHD coach, educator, content creator, podcaster, and co-founder of the Monoceros Initiative.
ADHDvCon was born out of a need for growth and innovation in the ADHD space. As ADHD awareness and diagnoses have grown the past few years, we saw an opportunity to showcase ADHD content outside of the standard conference and talk formats. The ADHD experience goes beyond one gender, one sexuality, one age group, one race, one ethnicity, one nationality, and one type of neurodivergence. It's about time for those other experiences and voices to be heard.
All presentations are under 25 minutes and optimized for ADHD brains. Our fair selection process is based on final video content, which allows us to guard against misinformation and allows those new to speaking to get their chance to shine.
Thank you for supporting us in our inaugural ADHDvCon. Here's how it will go. We will have a live stream link for each day of ADHDvCon. The live stream description will have the times each presentation will air, as well as a general time Q&As will start. There is a Q&A area of the live stream window that allows you to enter questions you'd like the presenters to answer. For our shorts programs, all shorts for each program will play back-to-back with one collective Q&A after all shorts have aired. Questions can be directed toward all of the presenters or to a specific presenter in the shorts Q&A. Each day's programming will be available to watch afterward on our YouTube channel.
We also hope you'll stick around for our info sessions on Starboard and the Monoceros Initiative at the end of day 2 and 3. At the end of day 2, we'll be announcing our 4th Starboard, an ADHD collaboration cruise. And during Shorts program number 4 on day 3, we'll be sharing more about the Monoceros Initiative.
Lastly, we wanted ADHDvCon to be accessible to everyone, which is why we made it free. But it isn't free for us to put it on. If you have the means and desire to do so, please support us in our cause by donating to the Monoceros Initiative. A link to our donation page is in the description of the live stream. If you have any questions about ADHDvCon, shoot us an email at monocerosinitiative@gmail.com.
All right, so let's get on with the programming.
Hi, I'm Jen Litvak with Positive Approach Life and ADHD Coaching, here to talk to you about 6 practical strategies to develop perseverance. So, what's perseverance? It's that grit and determination to keep going even when things get tough. For those of us with ADHD, sticking with something can be extra challenging, but trust me, this is doable. Strategy number 1, breaking it down. Big goals can be overwhelming. Breaking them down into smaller, manageable tasks, this makes it easier to see your progress and keep you motivated. Think of it as one step at a time rather than trying to scale a huge mountain. Strategy number 2, set micro deadlines. Micro deadlines can be your best friend. Instead of one big due date, set micro deadlines for each small task. This keeps you on track and makes the whole process less daunting. Plus, who doesn't love the satisfaction of moving things off that list? Strategy number 3, reward yourself. Celebrate your wins, no matter how small. Finish that task. Give yourself a treat. Personally, my treat is chocolate, but whatever works for you. This could be a snack, a short break, or even a quick dance. Reward yourself, and this helps you to keep yourself motivated. Have fun with it. Strategy number 4, find your support crew. Surround yourself with people who lift you up and keep you accountable. This could be friends, family, or even an online community. Share your goals and progress with them. They'll cheer you on, and it will help you stay on track. Strategy number 5, practice self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. Everyone hits bumps in the road, and that's okay. When things don't go as planned, don't beat yourself up about it. Instead, take some deep breaths, reassess, and keep moving forward. Remember, perseverance is about progress, not perfection. Strategy number 6, have a plan B. Sometimes plan A doesn't always work out, and that's perfectly fine. Having a backup plan ensures that you're prepared for setbacks that can keep moving forward. Flexibility is key. If one approach doesn't work, there might be another one that works. Now let's put these strategies into action. Think about a goal you're working on right now. How can you break it down? What micro deadlines can you set? How will you reward yourself? Who's your support crew? How can you practice self-compassion along the way? And do you have a plan B ready? Let me share a quick story. I had a client who struggled with focus on their projects. By breaking down their goals, setting micro deadlines, celebrating the small wins, and having a plan B, they saw incredible progress. They went from feeling overwhelmed to achieving things they never thought were possible. And you can do this too. Perseverance isn't about failing. It's about getting back up every time you do it. It's about seeing things through even when it's tough. All right, let's recap those strategies. Break it down. Set micro deadlines. Reward yourself. Find your support crew. Practice self-compassion and have a plan B. You've got this. I believe in you, and I can't wait to hear all the amazing things that you achieve with grit and grind. You can reach me at Positive Approach Coaching on Instagram, or you can email me at positiveapproachcoaching@gmail.com. Let's keep pushing forward and seeing our goals through to the end. Thank you.
What's up, team? Brendan Mahan here, host of the ADHD Essentials podcast. And I just want to share a quick tip, little strategy for you. I work with adults, I work with kids. One of the challenges that comes up related to ADHD that is not an obvious one is just swallowing your medicine, just swallowing the medications, the pills that we take. So I thought I'd talk about how I do it and what makes it easy. I am not going to take my Concerta right now because I took it this morning, but instead I've got a multivitamin, I've got a probiotic. I'm going to swallow both of them in 2 different ways because it depends on what the pill does. What we're going to do is pay attention to whether the pill floats or sinks, and that's going to determine what we do with our head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a mouthful of water. Then I'm going to pop the pill in my mouth. If it sinks, I'm going to look up. It'll sink to the back of my throat, and I'll swallow it. If it floats, I'm going to look down. It'll float to the top of my throat, and then I'll swallow it. Here we go. That's all there is to it. Pill number 2. That's it. That's all there is to it, literally. You can actually do 2 at once if one sinks and one floats by looking down. And then as you swallow, you kind of scoop up the one that sinks, right? So that it sinks to the back of your throat while the other one is floating there. And you can get both of them done at once. But for adults and kids that have trouble swallowing, often what happens is the pill just isn't far enough back in the throat. So this is a way to intentionally get that pill where you need it to be so you can swallow it more easily. I hope you found that useful. Have a good rest of your day.
Hi, I'm Kristin Galbreaith, and I have an ADHD brain. This is a great time to be diagnosed with ADHD because there has been a huge progress in the understanding of what that means for us just in the last 10 years. First, I want you to understand that there's nothing wrong with your ADHD brain. It may feel like there is because most people do not have brains that work the same way ours does. And because of that, the world, with its rules, accepted best practices, and institutions, is optimized for those who do not have ADHD. But once we learn a little bit about how ADHD brains work best, and how ours work best in particular, we can then start experimenting and discover what we're good at and use that knowledge to adjust our environment and choose approaches that will allow us to more easily achieve our goals. Ideally, we'll also like ourselves more. So, a left-hander is in a world dominated by right-handed people. For example, there are some scissors that are designed to fit in the hand very comfortably, making it easier to work longer when cutting. But most of those scissors are only suitable for right-handed people. Those same scissors are usually very uncomfortable to use when left-handed. A left-hander may modify their environment so that they can be more comfortable. When sitting at a booth or table in a restaurant, they may ask to sit on the outside so they can eat without knocking elbows with the right-handed diners. There's nothing wrong with being left-handed, but it can be very inconvenient. At the same time, there may be situations where it is very convenient to be left-handed. The experience of having an ADHD brain can be similar. Just as being left-handed can be inconvenient, having an ADHD brain can be inconvenient. Also, like left-handers, we can sometimes modify our environment so that we can do whatever it is that we want to do more easily. But most of us didn't learn how to do that growing up. We were largely taught how to get things done in ways that didn't work well for us, but they did work for the non-ADHD brains. What we need is a user manual that works for our brains. And we can create one as we discover bit by bit the approaches, tips, and tricks that work. It takes a lot of creativity to discover how to approach challenges in ways that work for us, approaches that we can put in our user manuals refer to in the future. Luckily for us, most of us are very creative. It's one of the strengths of having a divergent brain. So how do we go about discovering which techniques to put into it? Well, according to Dr. William Dodson, one huge difference between ADHD brains and non-ADHD brains is how the brains get motivated to action. When something's very interesting, we can almost work at it effortlessly with great intensity and find it hard to even stop working, whether to eat, drink, or even take bathroom breaks. He notes that in contrast, people without ADHD brains are sufficiently motivated by the importance of tasks to be completed, either to themselves or others that they care about, that they can move to action. So what we were taught growing up worked well for a different type of brain than what we have. And it's not our fault. It's just a neurobiological difference. So knowing that our brains can be moved to action based on interest, how can we make things more interesting so we can get started more easily? Imagine being able to get things done without having to rely on willpower all the time. It saves me a lot of emotional energy when I choose to work with my interest-based brain. For instance, I really like listening to music. It affects my mood and energy levels. Some types of music can make me feel that I just have to move around, and other types can help calm my thoughts and reduce my restlessness. So I started experimenting with using music as a tool to get started on tasks. I discovered that certain classical music recordings could reduce random thoughts and sensations and sounds and let me concentrate better when writing an article. I also use specific upbeat music tracks when I'm trying to do something uninteresting, like the laundry or picking things up around the house. I use Pomodoro for my work, and for my work breaks, I use music I cannot sit still to. It's so danceable, I just have to get up and move. So the music works for me at different times, and I use it for different activities. Dr. Dawson has an acronym that helps us remember how we can make tasks interesting. The letter I stands for interest. We can start by choosing an interesting task. C stands for challenge, where we can gamify our task somehow. We could try to beat the clock or do it faster than somebody else. N stands for novelty. If we can make it new somehow, maybe we can switch up the steps. Some people have even experimented with wearing different clothes when they sit down to do something boring, fun clothes. And some of the steps for increasing novelty can involve other people. And this is where body doubling can really help. U is for urgency. That's basically using deadlines. And they have to be external deadlines, at least in my case, because fake deadlines can't trick me into getting work done. But because our brain likes novelty, it is likely that after a few weeks, months, or years, the tricks won't work anymore. And we'll have to come up with new ones. There's a great book by Danny Donovan called The Anti-Planner, How to Get Shit Done When You Don't Feel Like It. I don't make anything off of this. I bought this for myself. It's chock full of ideas that basically how to increase interest in our tasks. And she also throws in a lot of information about ADHD. There's information about why some tasks might be hard for us to do, and about why some of the activities might work for us from a neurobiological standpoint. But remember, not every technique will work. When it does work, it won't work all the time or in every situation. But by trying different things, you can start your own ADHD user manual. Thanks for watching, and have an interesting day.
Masking with ADHD. Masking with ADHD. It's a term that resonates deeply with those of us navigating life with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Imagine if we could turn this concept of masking into something a little bit more empowering, a tool that we choose to use, like a hat. This isn't just any hat. It's a hat woven with threads of social intelligence, woven through countless interactions and learnings. When you wear this hat, you're not just fitting in, you're actively engaging in the subtle dance of social interactions. You're considering how you come across, listening actively, and making genuine connections. But here's the beauty. You can take off this hat whenever you want to. It's not a mask that you're trapped in. It's a skill that you wield. It's about choice, your choice, knowing when to use your social skills and when it's okay to let your true self shine through. So the next time you find yourself in social situations, remember, you're not just masking. You're wearing a hat of social intelligence, one that you can put on and take off as you see fit. Because true empowerment comes from embracing who you authentically are while skillfully navigating the world around you. Embrace your journey with ADHD. You've got this.
punched a hole in the wall. For the first time in a while, I totally lost my cool. Anger took over my mind and body completely. I'm not a violent person at all. I've never even been in a fist fight of any type, but at that moment, I needed to get the energy out somehow and hit the wall harder than expected. What came after was a familiar feeling, the inability to calm down, listen to anyone, and wanting to continue in my anger was all-consuming. All I could see was red, and wanted to lay flame to whoever was in my path. My ability for compassion and understanding was gone. I reverted back to a coping mechanism I used while growing up and left the situation altogether, knowing that was the only way to come to my senses. Once the anger subsided, shame and guilt were next to take over, as I had to now come to grips with the damage done, both emotionally and literally in the case of the wall. While getting to this anger point has happened many times throughout my life, it was the first time getting this angry since beginning my coaching journey. The fallout in the days after felt like a major setback. It led me to question whether coaching was effective at all. It led me to question whether I was a fraud as a coach. Enthusiasm waned for my coaching practice when just a few days before, I was ecstatic with the prospect of making a real difference in people's lives. The path to getting my energy and enthusiasm back was not apparent and started to affect me in unexpected ways. Intense emotions and the ability to control them are something that many ADHDers are all too familiar with, despite it not being mentioned as much as other symptoms. For this edition, we'll explore emotional dysregulation, how it shows up, how to manage it, and whether coaching makes any difference at all. Emotional dysregulation is the impaired ability to control emotional responses leading to extreme and often disproportionate reactions to small setbacks or challenges. It can show up in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's having a short fuse or being overly excited about something. Some experience it as rejection sensitivity, in which they are particularly sensitive to criticism or perceived rejection. Perceived being an important distinction, as we get in our own heads about why we were turned down or told no when really it had nothing to do with us. Then there is a total meltdown, which happens after emotions have built up so much they almost explode, causing us to act out, often leading to anger, crying, laughing, or bodily movement all at the same time. In these moments, we are feeling everything all at once, and our minds and body don't know what to do with it. For ADHDers, experiencing intense emotions constantly is par for the course. I often forget that not everyone goes through life feeling these intense emotions all the time, because I thought everyone went through life like this. As I start to look back at my childhood, it's so apparent how emotional dysregulation would emerge. I used to get so mad at my parents all the time as a child, or any authority figure. Most of the time, it revolved around being denied an activity or being rejected in some way. It became a cycle of acting out, being punished, then acting out more in response to the punishment. Sometimes the explosion would come from being bullied and teased. Sometimes I would freeze for a moment, feeling both angry and hurt at the same time before needing some kind of physical release took over, usually running off sobbing while throwing anything that I could get my hands on. I remember running away for the first time. I must have been in 3rd or 4th grade. I don't remember what set me off, but it had to do with an argument with my parents. I told them I was running away and ran out the door. I grew up in a really small town where as kids we would be out all over town on our own, so me running away wasn't as scary as it would be now, and my parents knew I just needed to blow off some steam. Nonetheless, there I was, halfway across town at the local burger joint. No money to buy anything, just crying at the table alone. A person working there came over to check on me. When I told her what I was trying to do, she asked me if I loved my parents and said that they would be worried about me. That small moment of compassion is all it took for me to realize my mistake. I immediately ran home in a sobbing mess, only wanting to be in the loving arms of my parents. Running away from situations that from the outside appear to be normal life occurrences, yet would cause intense emotions for me, became one of my first coping mechanisms. Maybe that's why the hole in the wall situation felt like such a setback, because it was literally taking me back to the same response I had as a young child. Over time, I developed other coping mechanisms, both healthy and unhealthy. On the unhealthy side, I learned to bottle up my emotions. Keeping my mouth shut would keep me out of trouble. No one could misunderstand you if you're not saying anything at all. Conflict avoidance was another route. This worked to a certain extent, but the need to express and to stand up for oneself could only be ignored for so long. Eventually, it would lead to an explosion of emotion that could get nuclear in size, depending on the situation. On the other hand, leaning into my hyperactivity was the most effective for managing my emotions. As someone who leans heavily on the hyperactive impulsive side of ADHD, I needed an outlet for the excess energy. I wasn't the most athletic kid, but I played all the sports growing up. It wasn't until falling in love with basketball that I had a real outlet for that energy. I would play 7 days a week. Hot, cold, it didn't matter. I had to play. It was on the court where not only could I get all that frustration and anger out, but also where I could find joy, acceptance, and a sense of accomplishment that was missing in my life. Without finding this outlet, I don't know where I would be. Basketball literally saved my life and still provides the same help with emotional regulation for me to this very day. As I got older and into adulthood, these outbursts sometimes developed into meltdowns. Coaching taught me the power of the pause and to ask myself, how am I feeling? And where in my body that feeling is coming from became another method of prevention. Taking a second to notice whether I was tired, not eating healthy, staying hydrated, needing to exercise, or needing to give my brain a break would help to be able to prevent getting to a meltdown point. Being attuned to these clues was not easy at first. With some practice and some help identifying where certain feelings are coming from and what they mean, I became aware of patterns and could predict needs based on what the situation called for. Even when an emotional outburst would happen still, coaching would help me dissect and identify what the root cause was. I found that in these extreme moments of anger or sadness, our brain sometimes latches onto that one thing to focus our emotions on. It's a survival mechanism that doesn't always serve us. Working with a coach, we can pick those emotions apart and get down to what the real issue at hand is. Often, we would emerge with a whole new perspective on the situation. Through coaching, I now know which tools to use to give my mind and body what it needs to maintain balance in a healthy way. ADHD is sometimes referred to as an invisible disability. We can have so much going on inside our brains, while to others on the outside, it may seem like everything is fine. After the hole-in-the-wall incident, I convinced myself that this tedious website rebuild project was a thing that was dragging my enthusiasm and excitement down. Once I finished that, I still could not get activated on writing this edition of the newsletter, and found myself doom scrolling on social media or watching TV instead. I could feel this blockage in my brain, but did not know how to get past it. The importance of being coached as a coach cannot be understated. If we believe in the process, we have to actively be committed to the process as well. Turning to my community of support, I set up a coaching call to get clarity on which topic I wanted to write about and how to get activated. At least that was the intention. What I actually got out of that session was that all the other topics I had in my mind were not as important as this one. This story is what needed to be told because it was the only one occupying my heart. Regulating emotions is still an ongoing struggle and will continue to be. Maybe proving that I'm not a fraud as a coach isn't about stopping the outbursts completely, but rather believing and trusting in coaching not only for my clients, but continually for myself as well. Full disclosure, the hole-in-the-wall outburst of anger stemmed from an argument with my daughter. Anyone who knows me personally knows that my love for her is the driving force in my life. She is my inspiration and the reason why I'm following this path as an ADHD coach. Like me, she has ADHD and deals with her own version of it. While we both can be overcome by intense emotions, they are not for the same reasons, nor do they come out in the same way. Her being recently diagnosed also means that we are at different points in our journey with ADHD. Not being able to see what she's feeling or struggling with inside, I tend to forget these differences. Looking back at the incident, I now see that what she needed most was compassion and understanding for what she had going on inside despite looking fine on the outside. I since fixed the hole, but more importantly, made things right with my daughter. Now, when I look at that spot in the wall, it's a reminder to give myself grace, but also to practice that same compassion for what others are going through, especially when it's not immediately apparent.
Okay, so welcome to the Q&A from these lovely shorts that we just watched. My name's Ron. I'm from the Monoceros Initiative along with Jaylyn. And if you have any questions to any of the videos, you can go ahead and put them in that little Q&A box that's in black. And you can do that for all the talks that we have coming up. If you don't get your questions answered, that's okay. Go ahead and shoot us a message either on Instagram or email, and we'll go ahead and reach out to these lovely experts to get your questions answered. But let's start off with Jen Litvak. Jen, we have a question for you. One of the strategies you mentioned was imposing micro deadlines on yourself. That can be hard for me. I know for a lot of other people. Do you have any strategies on how to hold yourself accountable if that happens to be something that you struggle with?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So really, there's multiple ways to do that. One way is to involve others, like find a friend, a family member, a coach, an accountability partner, and have them help you in terms of accountability. They can motivate you, they can check in on you. That's a great way to do it. Join an accountability group, break down tasks even further into, besides micro, make it micro. You could do that as well. And actually, I was talking to one of my clients today about this because I was talking about this specifically, and they even said gamify it, add a little bit more to keep you accountable and engaged. So make a contest out of it, or something like that. Use timers, use alarms. So reward. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, Kristin. Kristin Galbreaith. What are the first steps someone needs to take to refrain their negative self-talk? Because I know me personally, it took a while to kind of get that out of your head. It feels like something that a lot of people have had in their heads for a long time, and so it feels like it's really dug its claws into you. What's a tip you got?
Well, my mantra, and this is a long process, my mantra is, I don't think like they do, or they don't think like me. So little by little, I start evaluating the person next door who does the yard nicely every time or whatever. I don't have a yard, but you know what I'm saying. When I start to compare myself against somebody else, I'm thinking, if they have ADHD, I just apples and oranges. And it helps me be kind to myself.
Someone, I saw someone post something once that said, you don't have to start with, wow, I'm amazing. You could start with, maybe I don't just completely suck. Maybe it's just that little bit, right? Like starting small. Yeah, I love that. Okay. Dorsey McFadden.
Yeah.
How can someone support a friend or loved one who's struggling to find maybe a balance between masking and authenticity?
Yeah, we have to let them find their authentic selves so you can listen without judgment, validate their experience, encourage self-acceptance, and help them set boundaries in places where they might feel that masking is necessary. Always celebrate their moments of authenticity to build confidence. That way you can turn these masking skills into tools that you've worked really hard to develop and can choose when to use.
We have another question for you. Do you think that masking in itself is dangerous, like in regards to how draining it is emotionally to constantly have a mask on?
Yeah, energetically, absolutely, but it's a survival mechanism. I think we can turn it into an advantage.
Okay, nice. I love that. Carlos Prieto. Am I saying that correctly? I didn't even ask you.
Yes,
Totally
close
sure.
enough. Yeah.
Do you have any tips on how to recognize when your frustration is building before it turns to anger?
Yeah, definitely. I wrote about it in the article, and it all kind of starts with taking a brief moment, and it's really, really hard when you're starting to feel it build, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of catching those early signs, right? And a lot of it is like, where do you feel it in your body, right? So for me, like, it's like, I immediately start feeling flush, right? My head feels kind of warm. The face is warming up. I can feel the heart racing a little bit. The eyes are starting to widen a little bit. And those are the signs of like, oh, whoa, okay, something's changing here in my body. That means that something's coming, and I don't know what it is. Let me see what else is going on. Where is this coming from? Is this, valid?
Yeah.
Is this reaction that might happen, coming from a good place, or is it coming from just a place of misunderstanding?
Okay.
It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. To kind of piggyback, someone asked the question too, like in that specific moment with dysregulation, they said, because punching a wall is very relatable to them. Yeah, something that I've heard from people is like, there's that like being able to tell when it's coming on. Then there's the during and the after, right? Like the repair.
Yeah.
After. But the during, is there any like tips maybe that you have, or times when you've been angry that you've been able to kind of do something to kind of at least manage it, right? We're never going to make it go away, but to manage it.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's about finding where to release that energy, right? And sometimes it's just like for me, a lot of it is just kind of removing myself from the situation. If I'm getting to that point, right? So if I kind of catch it and it's like, yes, I'm mad, the feelings are valid. I mean, not necessarily that they're valid, but they're real feelings, right? They might not be coming from a great place, but they're real feelings. So if I know that I'm overreacting or something like that, it's like, okay, well, let me just remove myself and take this energy elsewhere. Let me go for a walk. I've mentioned playing basketball is a big release for me too, as well. Mm-hmm. And just do something with that energy. It's almost like just redirecting it in a lot of ways.
Nice. Okay, nice. Brendan, so I kind of told you this before. I was like, why have I not heard this, right? Do you have any other tips for taking your medicine? Because I feel like this should be common knowledge by this point.
Yeah, the other one that I know about, and this one is much more your mileage may vary than the two that are in the video, is some folks like to take their meds with a carbonated beverage, right? So seltzer or Sprite or something. And the idea is that the fizz kind of distracts the sensation of the pill being swallowed. I don't particularly love seltzer. Seltzer by itself makes me nauseous. And I don't really want to drink soda with my meds, so I go with water. But I know people who swear by it. So
okay, nice. I love that. I just got a Soda Stream, and so I'm obsessed with trying different types. And
okay,
I feel like that's how I'm gonna do it now. That's really great. To kind of add on to that, we had someone ask, how do you get your kids to take their meds if they are really resistant to medication?
All right. So not how do I get my kids, because my kids aren't resistant to meds. They're just like, okay, sure, I'll take it.
Yeah. Right.
But that's honestly where this video comes from, is I was working with a client whose their daughter wouldn't swallow her meds, wouldn't take her meds. And it was because swallowing her meds was difficult for her. So I just sort of thought it through and was like, well, what do I do when I take my meds? And I was like, oh, well, I tip my head around and make it float or sink to get it halfway swallowed. And then we just taught the daughter how to do that, and it worked. All of a sudden, it became an easier process for mom to manage. So the trick is to find out what's the resistance, right? Like what's the point of friction? For her, it was a point of performance issue. It was just she couldn't get the stuff to swallow. I've got another client who the meds that they have dissolve quick and taste bad. So we've tried putting water in the mouth first and then popping the pill in and swallowing it quick, because they were just sticking it on their tongue and then putting water in, and it would dissolve immediately on their tongue. And the other thing that we've done is we've done a couple of different ways. One is a piece of banana and sticking the pill into the banana and then doing it that way. And if your kid is going to bite that piece of banana, though, they might just crush the pill. And if it's extended release or something like that, that's a problem. And if we're trying to avoid horrible flavor, that's not going to work either. So the other option is to just mash up the banana or use applesauce or yogurt, something that's going to slide down but isn't necessarily a liquid, to kind of help the pill go down. So yeah.
Love that. I do have another question here for Carlos. Given our current environment, even though we're evolving into a healthier society. How scary was it to expose your emotion? I think men who feel shame will feel better about opening up with this.
Yeah. I was really nervous about putting this article out in the beginning, right? And especially, I mean, I published this thing on LinkedIn of all places. It's just like the oddest thing. And I knew, I was like, this is probably not the right place for it. But I mean, part of what I'm trying to do with this newsletter is really kind of give a slice of life of what it's really like, and because it's not always easy, right? And what we deal with is hard and it's heavy. And I did it also because I want to role model that for people and make it okay, because I know there's it's like one of those topics that doesn't really get discussed a whole lot. A lot of it's about activation and, how can I get this thing done and get past this? When in the process, I always thought like, hyperactive impulsive is kind of like my main ADHD trait. And as I wrote this thing, I realized like, man, emotional dysregulation is the thing I've always dealt with. And that was the hardest for me. So yeah, I felt after that, I once I had that kind of like realization, I was like, no, I have to get this out and put it out there.
Wow, I like that. Yeah. The men's ADHD support group, which Brendan is on too, talks a little bit about just expectations for men too. So that kind of ties into that, and they'll be on later today. Jen, I have another question for you, and I think it's because I feel like this is something that gets asked a lot, and I think as professionals, we forget because we use these terms so often when we chat with each other. You had mentioned some of the tips and tricks you use. You talked about, body doubling or like getting together with people. And I was wondering if you could maybe give me an example of body doubling, or a few examples or ways people can body double and what the heck it is. Because there might be some people going like, I don't even know what that is.
Sure, absolutely. So, there's different ways that people phrase it. There's body doubling, there's accountability partnering, and both pretty much are similar. But basically, find a friend, find somebody that you're comfortable with. It could be a friend, it could be a family member. You could be sitting and doing two different things and be working at the same time. So the idea and the goal of it is to feel like you can accomplish something with somebody, with having somebody else next to you. They say that when we have people next to us while we're working, you feel like, oh, that person's watching, but they're not really watching, or they're there, working also. So it makes you feel like, oh, I need to finish this and I need to do this too. And there's multiple ways to do it. So there is that, like I said, it could be somebody and you can ask a friend and say, hey, I got to clean my closet. I got to do the laundry. Can we do this together at the same time? Or it could be, I need to work on something. I'm going to go sit in Starbucks and pretend that the person sitting next to me on their computer is my body doubling partner. I've actually had people do this, and it works. So.
I do have to close off real quick. That's all the time we have. If you have any other questions, like I said, please reach out to these guys. They've been great. And here comes our next presentation.
My name is Ying Deng. I'm a meditation teacher and ADHD coach. I have meditated pretty regularly since the mid of 2020, and I first got into meditation when I was in college. So I'm super excited today to share my tips with you of how to make meditation more ADHD friendly. So I invite you to notice how your body is being supported by the surface beneath you, whether that's how you're sitting on a chair, how you're standing, or how your feet is on the ground. And then I invite you to squeeze your shoulder up towards your ears, if that's available to your body, and let them go. Let's do it again. Squeeze your shoulders up towards your ears, and let them go. So today my talk will cover what is meditation, why you might want to meditate, some of my personal tips of how to make meditation more ADHD friendly, what my daily meditation routine actually looks like. So first, what is meditation? Meditation, in its essence, is a training of directing your focus of attention in a very deliberate way. So I'm trained within the mindfulness tradition, and the mindfulness tradition is about paying attention to the present moment in a non-judgmental way. So it's deliberately paying attention to whatever is going on in this present moment in a non-judgmental, or in other words, I like to say it in a loving, curious way. Another way to think about being mindful or being in a meditative state is I invite you to reflect on this question of when is the last time your mind and body is in the same place? I love asking this question towards my clients, towards my students, and most people usually have a difficult time at first to recall an experience when their mind and body is in one place. And then I invite them to dig a little deeper. Usually it might be right after a shower or in the shower. It might be in nature, doing a nature walk. It might be you're exercising. So let's just pause here for a moment, and I really invite you to think about when is the last time your mind and body is in one place. So once you notice those moments, that's when I love to celebrate with people of congratulations, your mind is not too distracted to meditate. You naturally already have those mindful moments in your life. So my job here is to help you orient more towards those moments. It might be when you are watching a sunset. It might be when you are holding hands with a loved one. It might be when you're doodling, when you're hula hooping, when you are listening to a really good piece of music. But you have those moments in your life already. So to meditate is not to overcome some difficult barrier. You already have the ability. So my job here is to help you to cultivate that ability a bit more. So we talked about what is mindfulness or what is meditation. This very deliberate way of paying attention to what is going on in the present moment continuously in a loving and curious way. Then I want to talk about why do ADHD folks might want to consider meditate. Meditation now is becoming such a buzzword. It's seemingly popping up in every self-improvement articles. It seems to help with everything. But here I'm going to talk about very specific benefits of mindfulness has for ADHD folks. So this is from a paper that's written in 2022. The name of the paper is Mindfulness Interventions for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. So it's, to the knowledge of the author, the most comprehensive systematic review of mindfulness in ADHD. In this paper, they listed that mindfulness helps reduce ADHD symptoms for both adults and children, especially in attention. And mindfulness helps ADHD folks to improve emotional functioning greatly. Mindfulness helps ADHD folks to increase self-compassion. Mindfulness helps to improve quality of life for adults and reduce depression and anxiety symptoms for adults, which are two very common comorbidities for ADHD folks. Mindfulness helps to reduce ADHD parents' stress level, and what's more, mindfulness potentially improve executive functioning for both in ADHD adults and ADHD children, and potentially improve general behavior. So obviously, mindfulness has lots of great benefits. But just like any other good habits, cultivating a good habit is not always easy for ADHD folks. How do I manage to meditate for over 500 days? We all come through the door of mindfulness and meditation when we're really struggling with something. So for me, that moment happened first in college when I was dealing with depression. And then again in the middle of 2020, of when the world seems to have way more suffering than I have ever seen before. That's when I really set the attention to meditate daily. And that was way before I recognized any signs of ADHD. I wasn't even aware of anything related with ADHD. But intuitively, I understood that I couldn't just pick one meditation and set a particular time and just do that same thing over and over and over again. I intuitively start to explore different varieties of meditation, guided, unguided, with music, without music, different techniques, whether it's more mindfulness-based, repeating a mantra, more movement-based, like dancing meditation, or maybe more heart-based, like loving kindness meditation, compassion meditation. So each day I kind of cycle through my favorite meditation. I have a little meditation menu, and I kind of intuitively check in of how I felt each day and pick the meditation that's most appropriate of my daily mood. So that's kind of how I managed to meditate. Now I've recognized I have intuitively used some of the principles to make any habits easier to cultivate for ADHD folks. So if you ever read Dr. Holloway's book, who is an ADHD expert, he talks about how to cultivate strength through these steps. The first is to connect. The second is to play. The third is to practice. Fourth is to master. The fifth is recognition, and recognition leads right back to connect. So from those steps, I think there are some principles that emerge for cultivating any habits. I like to simplify it to call it make it fun, make it simple, and make it collaborative. So how can we make meditation more fun for ADHD folks? I kind of touched upon it earlier. One is to explore the varieties of meditation. There's different meditation anchors. That means what you choose to focus on during a meditation. Usually if you browse online, the most common meditation anchor is your breath. I've come to realize that a lot of times focusing on one particular anchor doesn't necessarily work for ADHD folks. So one thing I've learned from taking a neurodiversity informed mindfulness course is to combine different anchors as well as combine different sensations with anchors. For example, I invite you to do this practice with me together. We will try to combine sensations of our hands with the sensation of our breath. So I invite you to gently open your hands, stretch your palms, and feel the skin of your palm really stretching, and feel the back of your hand really bend if this is available to your body. And then gently close your hands together, your fingers touching each other. First, just be curious and pay attention to the process of opening your hands, stretch those palms, and closing your hands, and feeling the fingertips touch each other. Now is the time to add another layer of sensation. Next, I invite you to try to sync your in-breath and out-breath with this hand movement. So when you breathe in into your belly, have your hand gently open and really stretch those palms. And when you breathe out, your hands close. Breathe in, hands open. Breathe out, hands close. Breathing, hands open. Breathe out, hands close. Really trying to synchronize the in-breath with the opening of the hands and with the out-breath with the closing of the hands. Great work. So that's a demonstration of one of the best tips I've learned is to add a layer of sensations towards whatever anchor you have chose. So if you have chosen your anchor to be breath, you can explore what's it like to add the sensation of hand movement or add the sensation of breathing out with each sigh actually having sound. Or you can try having an external anchor, like a hand movement, combined with an anchor, like how your belly is expanding and falling, with each breath. So I like to use the analogy of I cannot pay attention to any lecture or any podcast if I'm just listening to it, sitting here doing nothing else. And I cannot do my chores. Chores are so boring. So what I do is I combine both. I will wash my dishes while listening to a really great podcast, or I will call my friends while I fold my laundry, or I might catch up on some lectures while I vacuum. Designing your own meditation practice is a bit like that. You have to experiment with combining different layers of sensation and different focus points. So try to experiment with 2 or 3 focus points. And I would suggest 1 external focus points and 1 internal focus points. And experiment what layers, what levels of sensation input is needed for you to enter your primal focus zone. So for me, I tend to meditate a lot better if I'm sitting outdoors on a deck or if I'm walking in nature, because there are just inherently a lot more sounds, a lot more sensations my body is feeling. Or if I'm sitting indoors, I tend to use background music or guided meditations, where I will light an incense just to engage more of my sensations, so I'm naturally in my primal focus zone. That's some ways to make meditation more fun. Another big way is to just meditations out there. I love the idea of being kind of like a kid in the candy store of, oh my God, there's so many types of meditations out there. There's so many meditation techniques. Like I briefly mentioned before, there are mindfulness-based ones, there are concentration-based ones, there are ones that you're just repeating a mantra, there are ones that you are moving, you can be standing, you can be dancing. There are ones you do outdoors in nature, really observe nature. There's eating meditation. I even meditate when I taking my salsa lessons. My salsa lessons kind of act like a movement meditation course for me, because I have to be in the present moment and not distracted, not overthinking, not in the future or not in the past, so that I am actually synced with my dance partner. So those are some ways I've thought about that really made meditations more fun for me. So I invite you to think about, for you, what would be the ideal meditation setting for you? Would it be indoors? Would it be outdoors? Do you prefer music? Do you prefer guided meditations or unguided meditations? Do you prefer incense or engaging other sensations, like doing meditation while you're drinking a cup of tea or when you're eating? I even have heard ADHD folks say they would meditate when they doodle or when they do hula hooping, when they listen to a really good piece of music. So the possibilities and designs are endless. It's all about finding what works for you, that particular combination of anchors and sensations that will work for you, that help you to focus on what you have chosen as your meditation anchor. The second biggest principle that stems from Dr. Holloway's connect, play, practice, mastery, and recognition is the connection part. I love to say, make things collaborative. We all know the magic of body doubling for ADHD folks. That means if somebody else is in the same space, doing something else with us or doing the same thing with us, we'll have more motivation to actually do the thing we need to do. That's the same with meditation. That's why, allegedly, even since the Buddha time, thousands of years ago, meditation is always encouraged to be practiced in groups. I personally really cultivated my practice in groups as well. So I invite you to check out any online meditation groups. Maybe you have local meditation groups available as well. If nothing else, I love to put on guided meditation so that I kind of experience this vibe of people practicing with me together. And one of the benefits of practicing in groups is I tend to bond with people so much easier if I get to practice with them. There's a very special sweetness and special type of intimacy that's cultivated by practicing together. And I get to hear other people sharing the ups and downs in their own life. And I tend to realize that, okay, progress is never linear, that we're all going through a lot of ups and downs, and that's okay, and that's normal in life. The third is make it simple. I love to say that I meditate because it feels good. And it feels good because I've made it simple, so I'm more likely to actually do it and finish this task, and the end result is it feels good for me. One is to remember that meditation is a practice. You're not required to be perfect. The end goal is not to get rid of all your thoughts and all your distractions. You're practicing the muscle of redirecting. So you don't have to be perfect to get started. The second, I'd love to recommend for people to start with what's easy for them. To start in the setting that's the easiest, the setting we kind of talked about in the first principle of make it fun. To start with what's already working for you. So remember the reflection questions of when your body and mind is in one place. What are some activities you're naturally doing that your body and mind is in one place? Then I will invite you to tag along some 3-minute meditation right after the activity. So that's one way to meditate. Another way to make it simple is to just incorporate meditations into your daily activities. Let's use brewing a morning cup of coffee as an example. What is the sight of brewing this cup of coffee? What is the sound of brewing this cup of coffee? And what is the sensations in your body about moving your arms or lifting a cup to drink the coffee? So if you incorporate sight, sound, and sensation, that's another way to make meditation more accessible into your daily life. Then it's really about using your strength. Some people are very visual focused, like me. Some people are more audio focused. They love music. So combine meditation with your favorite sensory experiences. For me, I tend to meditate pretty well in nature, doing a mindfulness of sight meditation. For some people, they may just put on their favorite piece of music, and that will bring them into that body and mind is in one place state. So think about what you naturally enjoy doing and what are your strengths, and try to combine those activities with meditation together. Another way to make it simple is what I like to call the on-the-go meditation practices, and like what meditation practices look like in my daily life. So I tend to divide meditation practices for myself into 3 energy levels. One is the high energy days. If I have a very high energy day, I'm very motivated, I'm well rested, I tend to go for unguided mindfulness meditation. If I have a medium energy day, I might go with a guided and structured meditation, so I have some guardrails for my mind, so my mind doesn't just jump to a million places. And I tend to rely more on the outdoor settings on my medium energy day to help me focus. And on the low energy days, I really just do on-the-go practices. I tend to do more body-based practices because body-based practices usually give me a very, very direct feedback loop. ADHD folks love to see the result immediately. So on those low energy days, I tend to do something like breathing exercise, shaking and dancing, or going through what we talked about before, like the sight, sound, sensations of a daily activity. And I gathered some phrases for myself so that throughout the day, if I need to regain a piece of mindfulness state, I tend to redirect myself to these phrases. Some of the phrases I use are, this too is part of the present moment. This too is part of the human experience. Yes, I'm feeling this, and I'm also aware of. Nothing is perfect, nothing is permanent, and nothing is personal by Ruth King. Or just run through the steps of rain meditation of recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. Or if I'm having challenging interpersonal connections, I remind myself this person is just like me. They have hopes and dreams and highs and lows and wins and struggles, and may I cultivate compassion to this person. Well, I hope you enjoy this talk of how to make meditation more ADHD friendly. I hope you have some takeaways from this talk, whether it's how to combine out of your body anchors with inside of your body anchors, or combine different sensations and anchors together to design a meditation practice that uniquely works for you. And I hope me sharing the real examples of how I meditate on different energy level days is helpful for you, as well as my own tweaks of how I manage to meditate pretty frequently. And I want to end on this note that your mind is not too distracted to meditate, and you are absolutely allowed to tweak your meditation practice and make it uniquely your own. And my name is Ying Deng, and you can find me on all social media platforms at ADHD Asian Girl. And please let me know what you think about this talk. And I hope you continuously enjoy your practice.
Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Q&A for how to make meditation more ADHD friendly from the Monoceros Initiative. I'm Jaylin, and I'm here with Ying Deng. Thank you so much for joining us for this Q&A, Ying.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jay.
Okay, so if anyone has a question for Ying about her presentation, go ahead and put it into the Q&A section of the live stream chat. And we will get to them if there's time. But the first question I have is, are there specific moments in our lives where you would recommend taking a pause to do meditation before moving forward?
Yeah, so for me, what comes up is the extremes. So either you're really happy, like you're doing something you genuinely enjoy doing, or it's a special moment, or you're connecting with people that are really special to you. So as a way to kind of prep yourself so you can be better in those moments, really enjoy those time with your loved ones, or you're traveling a dream destination, really soak in those special moments, like being fully in your senses in those moments. That could be one, or just more day-to-day activities that you really enjoy doing, like doing your hobbies, or just anything that could amplify the happiness and help you to soak the moment in. And on the other spectrum of, like, if you are quite emotional, like upset or angry, if you have found previously that meditating would help you, then that would be also a good moment to meditate. And then if I add a third one, that would be anything that's usually new and nerve-wracking. That's also a pretty good moment to meditate. I certainly meditated before I went to my first chat conference. Like every single morning, I was like, I'm going to meditate to prep myself.
Yeah, so whenever we're feeling a little extra emotional, whenever we want to soak in and be present in the moment,
Yeah.
and whenever there's a lot going on, that's a lot of
Yeah.
times where it would help,
A lot
right?
of times. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Okay, awesome. So just do it all the time. Okay. The next
Yeah.
question is, you said you've tried a lot of different types of meditation and use the one that fits best for you. Can you describe a few of the other meditation types and who you think those would work best for?
Yeah, so I've heard there's a few things here. One is we can think about the window of tolerance, which is a psychological concept of, where you feel within the window of tolerance, you're, secure, safe. You can learn things, play things, respond to people relatively well. And then there's out of the window of tolerance, which on one end, you can get into fight zone of really like the anger or really want to respond, or the other side could be flight, like trying to escape or even freeze, which you're just like the inertia is really there. Sometimes I think in that framework. So if I notice I'm really like agitated, or I feel like there's so many things flying at me, that I will go for the grounding type of meditation. Like really, if I can be in nature or be on a deck, connect with some natural elements, grounding my senses, those are really good times. As well, and breathing meditation in those times could be really helpful, to just using your biology to help yourself to relax and soothe. And on the other hand, if I'm flight, I'm escaping, or I'm freezing, then I will use something like dance meditation to kickstart the energy, to help myself to like get a little bit of joy in movement. Or walking meditation, or meditation with music that I like, could really help as well. So you can kind of decide on with that framework, or it just testing things out to see, for you, what works better for you. For some people, they really like a single focus meditation, like repeating a sentence over and over again, like a mantra. For some people, they really like the mindfulness meditation of being able to, recognize their thoughts and let them go, and recognize their emotions and let them go. So in the end, it's testing different things out and see what works for you. And I also want to cover like just the emotional regulation. The part that usually if I do have strong emotions, the go-to for me is RAIN, which I covered in the video: recognize, acknowledge or accept, investigate, nurture. Like going through those steps usually helps me. And that's something I kind of go use day to day in all kind of moments. Yep.
Okay. So it's not just it's different for every person, but it's also different for every situation and what our
Yes.
needs are for that meditation. Love it. Okay. Next
Yeah.
question is, do you have any suggestions for encouraging our children, and this person's child is 12, to get started with a meditation practice?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of great children or teenager meditation online. Like some of them I covered in the video as well. For example, the figure 8 breathing. So kind of drawing a figure 8 with your hands or with your pen while doing the breath work together. So a lot of what I've seen for children is combining different types of anchor together. So they can focus on multiple things, like for example, the hand movement and breathing together. I do think for children, another way to access meditation a little easier is, if possible, doing it in nature, because we are just generally a lot more mindful in nature settings already. And there's just a lot more going on with our sensories. So that's another easy way in as well.
Okay. Do you have any recommendation for how much time we should take for meditation, especially when doing it before we're doing something that may be taxing with our ADHD?
Yeah. So for me, even like a 3 minute to 5 minute short breathing meditation could work really well. Like in my during my day-to-day elements and activities. So it doesn't have to be really long. And so do whatever you can. And you will start to notice, okay, did I feel a little bit better after I doing it? And the next time, maybe add just 1 more minute. I always say you don't have to do a really long an hour meditation to feel the benefit. Yeah.
Okay, and I think this one might be our last question. We'll see. Sometimes my brain just will not stop, and it's so hard to do anything to slow things down. And sometimes it makes me even more angry. How do I work around anger when it's
Mm.
at my brain not letting me?
Yeah, so that's why, like, what I covered, hopefully in the video, is mindfulness. The definition is loving and awareness. So the loving piece is big too. So first of all, you're not doing anything wrong. Our mind just generate thoughts. That's what mind does. One of my meditation teachers said, it's like the mouse generates saliva. That's just what the mouse does. And I was like, yeah, that's true. So our mind generates thoughts. So if I may give a suggestion, then I would say give yourself a little bit more transition time between, like, say, maybe running around to meditating. So if that's journaling, dumping some thoughts out, or doing some movement-based meditation to kind of help yourself transition into a more steady inner focus state, that's a possibility. And then, yeah, with the anger, one of my meditation teacher, Tara Brock, she always said, invite the anger to tea, like having compassion for the anger. I'm like, oh yeah, there you are, anger. Like you can acknowledge it without having to listen to it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I love this. All these are such great tips because I know that meditation is such a tough topic for so many of us with ADHD. Thank you so much for coming in, giving us that wonderful presentation, and answering all the questions.
Of
If anyone,
course.
yeah, if anyone has any other questions that they would like to ask Ying that maybe we didn't get to or you didn't think of in time, go ahead and either send us an email or find Ying on social media. It's all on our page, and go ahead and ask there. Otherwise, we are going to move on with our next presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Mullins. I'm an executive coach focused on leaders with ADHD. I've been in the leadership development space for most of my career, and one of the most nebulous topics across all roles, all industries, is executive presence. If this is a phrase that you have come across, I hope you get something out of this. It's a simple phrase that can carry so much weight. It could be in project feedback or your annual review. And in my coaching practice, I've had clients that struggle to understand what their leaders really mean when they say something like, you just don't have the executive presence yet. Nobody wants to hear feedback like that, partially because it's negative, partially because it's vague. But as an ADHDer, we might have an even harder time with that. If you have RSD or rejection sensitive dysphoria, hearing or even anticipating that negative feedback could trigger a physical response. We also much prefer direct communication. So vague references and phrases that don't really explain anything don't do anything for us. We're looking for specific examples. We want actionable steps. And if that feedback can be supported with data, whether quantitative or qualitative, that message helps it land even better. So if you are a leader with ADHD and you've ever experienced, ever received any of that vague feedback on executive presence, stick with me for about 20 minutes and we'll make sense of this topic. It's a pretty big topic, and I can work one-on-one with clients on this for weeks on end. So we're not going to solve all the problems in the world, but we can dig in and shed some light on the topic. And then I think if you can commit to carving out some time in the weeks and months to come, you can follow up on a few things and keep working on what we talk about. As I mentioned earlier, I work with leaders with ADHD, but we know ADHD doesn't just impact us at work. This is part of who we are. It's part of how we live. And so it's showing up whether more as inattentive or more as hyperactive, impulsive, or most likely a combination of both. And this carries over from work to family and friends and beyond. So understanding kind of some of these, perceived behaviors and leadership elements can really be helpful in a number of different ways. When we kind of zoom in and focus on ADHD at work, we can talk about some really great things that an ADHDer can bring. I am not of the camp that ADHD is a superpower, because I do recognize that there are some really heavy, hard parts of it. But with those hard parts, I think there's some great parts too. So on the left side of the screen, you see some of the great things an ADHDer might be able to bring to this space, whether it's a team or a company. You might be a passionate problem solver. You might be able to harness your hyperfocus in really constructive ways. You might bring new perspectives and be able to approach problem solving with a really strong intuition, which helps with decision making and decisiveness. All those things are really great. But on the other hand, there are times that we can just be misunderstood. We can come across as disinterested if we're more of a visual learner and we're forced to be in an audio only meeting. This session was going to be audio only, but I didn't want to exclude people who learn a certain way. So I've put together slides so that if you want to follow along that way, you can do that. Other people might be seen as disruptive or unprofessional if you're tapping your foot or fidgeting with jewelry. But this is common behavior. It might be some hyperactivity showing up, self-stimulating behavior, which some folks use to just kind of calm down and center themselves in the moment. People might also assume that we're annoyed or aggravated with an individual when we're simply just overwhelmed by events. So when the pressure is on at work, our emotional regulation is really important. And when we can't really navigate that very well, or if we don't know what to look for, that's going to impact things like executive presence. And the last one on the screen there is motivational regulation. And people might see others as being lazy when really they just have inconsistent motivational regulation. They might not know how to get started, or they might not know how to kind of keep that momentum going on a project that might not interest them as much. So being misunderstood for who we are absolutely adds complexity to the leadership development journey for leaders with ADHD. And many of these examples will show up again as we dig into executive presence. The goal will not be to fall in line with neurotypical standards, but to understand the downstream impacts of these behaviors and to better advocate for workplace settings that let us be unapologetically ourselves. All right, so let's define executive presence. A Harvard Business Review article from a few years back referenced executive presence as a make or break factor in considering C-suite promotions, but struggled to define that further. Other attributes mentioned in the same breath as executive presence are often self-confidence, a sense of control in unpredictable situations, powerful communication, and even body language comes up sometimes. But if you're familiar with this term and you can't quite define it, you're not alone. In 2019, the Human Capital Institute conducted research on this topic. And they found that 92% of the people they interviewed, all HR professionals, agreed that executive presence is important. Only about half of them knew how to define it. Now, despite this lack of definition or criteria, only 19% said that it was difficult to identify somebody with executive presence. So almost everybody thinks we need it. Only half the people have any definition for it, but 4 out of 5 essentially say that they know it when they see it. Yikes. So this is why I have spent so much time at this intersection between understanding ADHD and helping people advance in their careers, because this topic has so much room for growth, so much opportunity to understand it differently. In addition to sharing the research here, I'll also talk a little bit about other ADHD research, share my own experiences, and hopefully together we can break down this big topic and end up with some actionable plans that you can carry forward. All right, so when the Human Capital Institute did this research, they boiled down executive presence into 3 key factors. How simple? Interpersonal aptitude, professional effect, and technical competence. And each of these factors have a number of skills, abilities, and characteristics. So we're going to dig into those next. But overall, these are the 3 big buckets. And so when a leader is looking for a promotion and they get feedback about executive presence, there's a likely chance that one of these 3 buckets is missing. So you could be so strong in 1 or 2 of these, but it's kind of like a stool. And if you're missing one of them, you had this 3-legged stool that just lost a leg. So we want to keep the legs even and make sure that you are supporting who you are as a leader, each of these 3 key factors. So jumping into interpersonal aptitude first. This was done on a 5-point scale. 350 people were asked to say how important these things listed were. And the percentages we see on the screen represent participants who identified these things as very or extremely important. So 4 or 5 on the scale. So for example, the bottom one listed their communication skills is 91%. So 91% of the 350 individuals interviewed are saying that communication skills are very important or extremely important when it comes to executive presence. Following right behind that, relationship building and integrity and trustworthiness are right behind them. Lower in the 80s would be acting in alignment with core values, composure under stress, and self-regulation. That's a big one for ADHDers. And then in the 70s, there was emotional intelligence, listening skills, and authenticity, and kind of bringing up the rear, but I think it's very important, especially when we want to advocate for neurodivergent teams and, kind of create a space for ourselves at work, is inclusiveness. So looking at this list, there are topics that you might feel like you are just crushing it, and that's amazing. So congrats to that. There might also be topics that you don't have such a great handle on. So aside from initial self-reflection, there's other ways we can gather information on how you show up at work. 360-degree surveys are administered by a third party to everyone around you on an org chart. So if you're here, you have your immediate boss, you have peers, you have direct reports, and through all these different pieces of feedback, you start to get this 360-degree view of how you show up at work. With the larger groups, with peers or direct reports, if there's 3 or more, we can anonymize the data, but we can also average together some things. And so if there's an outlier or 2, we can kind of mute those a little and look at the bulk of the responses. But this is really great because we all have blind spots, ADHD or not. And so this is one of the tools that we use to uncover some of those blind spots and really help us understand how we're being perceived and what we can do to kind of change the narrative. We can also dig deeper into this without direct input from others. I frequently use this other set of assessments that only the individual in question would take. So if you were trying to understand more about how to build your executive presence, we would have you take a series of assessments with almost 600 questions, but they go really fast because there's a lot of repeats to make sure you're answering it the same way consistently. And then that helps us glean insights on how you are perceived at work. So this can be really valuable in a number of different ways, because sometimes we just have trouble seeing where we shine and what value we bring to the table. Other times there's things that we think are a big strength, that we think people are lucky that we have that. And it's actually coming off a little too strong or not perceived in the right way, and it's creating friction or pushing people away from us. Assessments can be really valuable for individuals or teams if you're looking for patterns or preferences that are impacting the organization, but we're not going to do that today. So I'm relying on you and your own self-reflection to look at these elements within interpersonal aptitude, and we're going to do a little activity. So open up a Word doc or notebook, and what I want you to do is look at these skills, abilities, and characteristics and jot down what you perceive as your highest or best. If you think you're just awesome at something in particular and you think others would agree, make a note of that. And because this is recorded, you can pause at any time if you want some extra time to think about these different questions I'm going to ask. But I'm just going to keep rolling through. So after you have kind of your strongest one here, I want you to look at the list again and think about what could be perceived as your biggest weakness. Now, this could be something you've gotten feedback on before, that a manager has told you it's a weakness. It might be something that ultimately you're delivering and people wouldn't know it's a weakness, but you are like white knuckling through, and to deliver at that level exhausts you and you are just completely wiped out. That's not ideal either. So if that's the case, then there's more we can do to help kind of build that up. And so it might be a weakness that you've had feedback provided on, and it might be something that you're just kind of like waiting to exhale. So once you have that identified, we'll make a couple more notes. So I'll let you pause if you need more time. Otherwise, we can keep going on that opportunity area. And I want you to jot down, it could be one person, it could be a few people, but who can you talk to get feedback about this? If you picked listening skills, who could you talk to validate your thoughts on the topic and see if they agree or what feedback they have or what advice they have? Think about who you can talk to about this. Next, I want you to think about some resources you could tap into. This might be articles or podcasts. It might be internal resources to your company. But what could you do to kind of self-study and learn more about this area that you've chosen? And lastly, I want you to imagine 1 year from today, if this item is fully addressed, and it is now one of your strongest elements within these 3 factors, how would that make you feel? Capture any notes about how it would impact, maybe your next promotion or certain relationships at work or how productive you are. Whatever angle you want to take, capture any thoughts of how you'll feel if you are able to move the needle on this significantly. All right, and when you're done with your thoughts on this, we'll move forward to professional effect, which is the second key factor. And so this is effect with an A. So we're talking about more of like influence. We have self-confidence at 85%, influence and power at 73, assertiveness is at 60. The last 2 are all the way down in the 40s. So they were important enough to be on the top 5, but only 43 or 44% of the HR professionals interviewed thought that this was very or extremely important when it comes to executive presence. So that would be charisma and charm and physical appearance. So for this activity, we're going to do the same thing as the last bucket of items. But if you just want to look at the top 3, assertiveness, influence and power, and self-confidence, or really bottom 3 on the slide, I meant top 3, like the highest percentages. Look at those 3 and, or you can use all 5 if you'd like, but pick which one you're knocking out of the park, which one you feel that you are really good at and people would say great things about you. Next, I want you to identify your biggest weakness on this list. And again, I want you to think of 1 to 3 people that you can talk to, get feedback, validate your thoughts. Who can you talk to inside your organization or outside about this topic? Next, I want you to jot down any resources you could tap into. Again, this could be publicly available articles or podcasts, or this could be something more company specific. And lastly, 1 year from today, if we revisit this and what you had chosen as a weakness is now one of your strongest assets, a characteristic or skill that is just off the charts, how would that make you feel? And how would it impact your work? Again, you can take a pause here, or if you're ready to keep going, we'll move on to the technical competence. Finally, the third key factor in executive presence is technical competence. And this will look slightly different role to role, but across the 350 people interviewed for the research, it came down to delivering results, strategic thinking, expertise, decisiveness, and vision. So out of those 5, which one are you knocking out of the park? What are you great at? Next, what's your biggest weakness? And who can you talk to about that? Who can provide feedback? What resources can you tap into? And how would you feel if this item was wholly addressed by this time next year? Those are 3 big buckets with a lot of juice under each topic. And I'm going to challenge you to make a plan and work on those 3 items you've identified. Set up time on your calendar, maybe a week from today, sometime next week after you digested everything from this conference, and you can dedicate a nice block of time. Think about your goals, think about the steps you need to take to reach those goals. And even when it feels silly, I encourage you to break down those steps as small as possible. If you are trying to climb a ladder that is missing a few rungs, it's a lot harder. So breaking down things that feel kind of silly are going to help you, anybody, but especially the ADHD brain in a number of ways. This can help with some motivational regulation, getting started and keeping our momentum. It can help with, just because taking one tiny step is a lot easier than jumping up to what would have been the 3rd or 4th rung. It can help with feeling accomplished when you have smaller items you can check off. That's really rewarding. And sometimes we just need that little dopamine hit to know that we did something really good. That helps see what progress you're making too, which I love. And having more items on your to-do list or more steps in the process kind of helps with time management as well. It's easy for us to think something will take just a moment. And before we know it, the sun has set, we missed 2 meals, hours have passed, and we're not done. So to be able to break things down and bucket the work differently can help us prevent falling victim to time blindness and just kind of getting sucked into this black hole where we just keep working on something. But having smaller actionable steps and meaningful milestones will help you anticipate how long things will take. It'll help with making really good progress. So just as a refresher, we have these 3 key factors that we were introduced to for executive presence: interpersonal aptitude, technical competence, professional affect. So we were able to cover all 3 of these big factors of executive presence, and within them, each of these different skills, abilities, and characteristics. So in the notes, you should have 1 item under interpersonal aptitude that you are looking to work on, 1 under professional affect, and 1 under technical competence. As I mentioned earlier, this is a big topic to pack into a quick session. So if you or your organization wants more information on the assessments I mentioned, or if you want to connect outside of the conference, I'm going to put my contact information on this screen. This QR code goes to a link tree with all this information with socials and website posted there. That's easier. So whether you are a leader or an aspiring leader with ADHD, I hope this session sheds some light on this big nebulous topic of executive presence, and I hope it gave you an idea of where you want to draw your focus as you advance your career. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right. Welcome everyone to the Q&A for ADHD at Work, Building Executive Presence from the Monoceros Initiative. I'm Jaylyn, and I'm here with Julia Mullins, our lovely presenter. Thank you for being here.
Everyone.
Okay, so just like all the other ones, if you have a question that you'd like Julia to answer, go ahead and throw it into the Q&A section or into the chat. But my first question is, you spoke about using assessments and 360 input from our managers and our peers in order to get a clear picture of what we can improve on with executive presence. Do you have any tips on how to manage rejection sensitivity dysphoria or RSD during this feedback and discovery process?
Yeah, that's such an important thing. We know RSD is so real with so many of us. And even if you don't have RSD, feedback in general is not always a comfortable conversation. So I think some of the advice I have actually goes back to even what assessments are you going to do? And this is why I always steer away from, the fun little like BuzzFeed quizzes and things like that online. And I jokingly call most things that aren't, some formal training a BuzzFeed quiz. Because first of all, they don't really get to know you. They're kind of scratching the surface, but they're not truly assessing you as an employee or a person. And so you're kind of getting some, little horoscopes spit out at you that might not matter. And then the other thing is there's no actual debrief. So it's not somebody who understands you that comes at it with empathy and, kind of breaks it down into digestible bits. It's just, here's how you show up, and it might not really land with you. So that is part of what went into me deciding what assessments I wanted to get certified in, because the training that I had to take really mattered. I did not want to be put in a position where I had to sit in front of clients and, watch them, have big emotions about some of the things I was saying and not be ready to speak to that. So with Hogan assessments that I use, that I think I mentioned in the presentation, these really, I went through a week-long training. And so I think it was like 20 hours or something. And so I continued to work with Hogan to understand how to address this. And even when I had like a report that I hadn't seen before, there was a couple of things that kind of contradicted, I was able to talk it out with people at Hogan. And so by the time I get to the client, not to say I have all the answers, but I do feel prepared to have that conversation. And I think that's really important, so that, it's not on the client to figure out how to manage everything, but it's, how that information gets delivered to you. So on your side of things, as you're receiving that, I think it is important, I know it's easier said than done, but to always just remember that this is just information. It's just data on a page, and what you do with it is important, and that's the next step. But right now you are just consuming this, and you are not required to do anything yet. So if you need to take a break, or, say something about it, or ask questions, take your path forward. But just drink it in as slowly or as fast as you're ready to do it.
I love that. Take care of yourself first,
Mm-hmm.
and then move forward when you're emotionally prepared to do so. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question. Do you have any tips on how we can advocate for our needs and communication styles with ADHD during the executive presence growth process that would make us more successful?
Yeah. So, throughout this 3-day conference, people are going to hear so many different phrases and terms that within the ADHD community, we all understand it. And even if you hear it and you're like, wow, that perfectly describes me, I understand it now, repeating that back to your manager might not land. So being able to kind of use language that they understand is really important. And so one of the things I like to do is, we understand it's RSD that, might make us feel a certain way. But what we can do is manage expectations about how things are happening to prevent us from feeling that way. And so saying, I want to get information ahead of time. I don't want to be surprised with information, or, just expressing yourself, kind of take the ADHD out of it, not to hide it or avoid it, but just to kind of bring it back to simple language that resonates with the peers or leaders that you're trying to connect with.
Yeah, and I love that, because ADHD is a human,
Yeah.
it amplifies the human experience, right? And so
Yeah.
using that language, the shared language, is really helpful. Okay.
And I think all those, the pillars, the three pillars and all those key factors, that's a whole word bank for you to use. And so talking about any one of those things are not specific to ADHD. But if one of them is really important to you, you can talk about one of those things to, get an accommodation or communicate differently.
Amazing. Do you have any examples of times you've seen someone apply a small change that helped them with executive presence?
It's funny because sometimes the small things are actually really big things. So yeah, the first thing that came to mind sounds small, but it's a lot of work. But I was going to say the thing that comes to mind is I had this client who was just certain she was crushing it, and she had no idea why others didn't agree. And when we kind of broke it down into these three key factors, she realized she was off the charts with technical competence, but she really did not understand how her interpersonal aptitude and professional affect were coming into play. And so that mindset shift where she became open to acknowledging this and ready to shift and, even just, kind of take that third person point of view and see how she shows up. I felt that was one of those little changes that has a big impact.
Love it. Love it. Success story.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned emotional dysregulation being a key factor in how others perceive us and who we are and what we're trying to do. What tips do you have for managing emotional overwhelm and dysregulation?
As simple as it sounds, I always come back to just taking a break, take a pause, reset. Sometimes that means saying, I need to call you back later, or, let's pick up this meeting tomorrow. But there are so many times where we're just at the end of, what we can give for a certain day or a certain time, and we start acting in ways we're not really that proud of. So before that happens, just recognize that you're kind of out of your element and do what it takes to reset. And that might be meditation with Ying. It might be a little callback to earlier in the day. It might be just go get a cup of tea and, sit outside. I like to look at the trees. Something about wind blowing through leaves is very serene to me. But yeah, just kind of get back to your neutral before you address anything, because I think we've all learned that if we keep throwing more energy at a situation where you're already dysregulated, it doesn't actually get better.
Yeah. So what would you suggest to someone where maybe they got the assessment and the 360 and they're like, I don't even agree with this. I don't agree with this. People keep saying this. I don't think this is a thing.
Yeah, that that can happen. A lot of what we do with the Hogan is we break down the certain behaviors into really kind of smaller steps within that. So I had a leader who thought he was doing a great thing by coming into the office every day, stopping by every single cubicle, walking into every single office. And he finally got to work about 3 hours later after he did his rounds. And he didn't see any flaw with that. He thought that was a really great way to start the day. And as we started going through the assessments, there was a couple of different indicators that said that, this outgoingness, this need to connect is great until you use it a little too much. And so on Hogan, there's kind of a scale 0 through 100. And if you're in the 80s, that's great. You have a strength and you're using it appropriately. And then if you're in the 90s, 98%, you are a little too strong in this space. And so what he thought was a good thing was coming off too strong. And so when he saw it through that lens, we were able to break down that behavior and understand how it could have been perceived by other people. And I think he really had a moment, stepping back and recognizing, that morning routine might need some adjustment.
Okay. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thanks again,
Yeah.
Julia, for joining us for this Q&A and for your lovely presentation. If anyone has any other questions, go ahead and shoot us an email and we will forward it, or find Julia on her social media and ask her directly. Thank you so much. And we are going to move on to the next presentation.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mark Almodovar. I'm the founder and president of the Men's ADHD Support Group. Today, we are going to be talking about common misconceptions of masculinity, fatherhood as men with ADHD, work of neurodivergent men, and redefining masculinity within our youth. Now, the Men's ADHD Support Group began around 2019. At the time, I had just become a certified life coach and started to build some amazing connections with people doing really great work in the ADHD space. And one of the things that really caught my attention was the fact that boys and men are the ones that are highly diagnosed with ADHD. But when it came to safe spaces and resources dedicated to these men, there wasn't really anything out there for us. So I was going for a walk one day and I decided, you know what, let me try out a small little Facebook group and see how it goes. Maybe no one's going to join, who knows? And what the heck, let's give it a go. Impulsively, I followed through on the idea, and a year went by. We were a low volume community, didn't really have many members at first, but then once the pandemic hit, things really started to shift. The need for men's mental health grew tremendously. We started growing from 50 to 100 members per week. And during this time period, John Hazelwood, who does work for Black men with ADHD, came to me and said, let's make this Facebook group into something bigger. Let's make this into an actual community, because people need that right now as we were stuck in our homes. We did that, and it's one of the best ideas that we've ever followed through on. The community has grown into the largest online space for men with ADHD. We're reaching over 17,000 members. We're now a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our intention is to educate and inspire men with ADHD to be their best selves. Emotional strength and stoicism. This can be problematic because this often leads to us bottling up our emotions for years and years and years, often leading to an explosion, emotional breakdowns that negatively impact things like our careers and things like our relationships with our loved ones. Physical strength. This often leads to us having a negative outlook on our physical appearance, often leading us to have things like body dysmorphia and physical insecurity within our own selves. Confidence and purpose. This discourages us seeking help when we're struggling. It creates the pressure to appear confident, so much so that we're trying so hard to appear confident and we're not focusing on the things that we need to, like being ourselves, like doing our career the way we need to do it. This idea that we need to be a provider and have stability at all times, often leading us to work these jobs that make us miserable. And when we do choose to live that lifestyle, which is totally okay, by the way, if someone chooses to live that, we're not even able to achieve that because of our lack of emotional awareness and mental health support. Now, what the Men's ADHD Support Group is here to do is we are here to show men that it is okay to be vulnerable and feel our emotions. Turns out we're not robots. We want to show men that it's okay to ask for help when we need it, because getting help is the thing that will lead us to more confidence and better success in our careers and our relationships. We want to show men how to follow their values and interests so that we live a life that is meaningful, as opposed to living a life to try to appease others. And we want to show men that it's okay to not be okay, that it's okay to slip up and fail sometimes. It's part of being human. Doesn't make us less of a man. These misconceptions are so harmful because it leads us to not believing in ourselves and not having the self-confidence that we need to achieve these day-to-day ambitions that we have. What we're looking to do is we want to showcase that with these struggles, these men are not alone. We want a space where members can vulnerably share whatever it is that they're going through, whether it be in a Zoom meeting or in person, and see a bunch of heads nodding, saying, yep, I go through that too, and provide that instant feeling that many of our members have. That feeling of, oh, I'm not as alone as I once thought I was. I'm not as crazy as I once thought I was. And it turns out that there's people out there who are just like me and managed to get on the other side. That is what we are here to do as a community, to show these men that they're not alone and to increase our ability to look in the mirror and appreciate who we are and know that our strengths and values have a place in this world.
My name is Brendan Mahan. I'm the host of the ADHD Essentials podcast. I'm a board member of the Men's ADHD Support Group and the creator of The Wall of Awful. I want to briefly talk about fatherhood and ADHD because the expectations for fathers are changing, and they've changed significantly in my lifetime. And I think it's important that we highlight that. My dad was not expected to be all that engaged with me as a kid unless we were playing baseball. That was about it. As I got older, he went skiing with me too and sort of did some of the hobby stuff. But for the most part, he wasn't really helping me with my homework. He wasn't enforcing that I did chores or teaching me how to do chores. And he didn't really engage much with my friends and what was happening with me socially and those sorts of things. Nowadays, though, fathers are expected to take a much more significant role in their children's lives. We, because I am a father, are expected to help them navigate their mental health, figure out their schoolwork. We want to pay attention to their social development with regard to friends and their ability to interact with adults and children and their peers. And then we also connect with their activities and are they doing hobbies and doing things beyond school. It's tricky. This level of expectation for fathers is new. And because our dads were not expected to do that, we don't necessarily have role models to look to figure this out. And so some of us are kind of flying by the seat of our pants and doing our best to figure it out as we go. And we're also, as men in a relationship, expected to help around the house, communicate more effectively, and have stronger emotional intelligence than we did in the past. That might look like managing our emotions and keeping ourselves balanced and regulated. That might also look like when we do have some emotional challenges, being able to apologize for that and make amends and improve the areas that we're struggling in so that we don't make those same mistakes in the future, at least not too often. And so we men need to know how to manage our anxiety. And that means we have to do a better job of self-care, right? We have to know that we've dialed in our sleep and our habits are serving us and are ADHD friendly. We want to make sure that we have those relationships, both with our spouse and also outside of that relationship, where we've connected to friends and peer groups so that we can have healthy relationships throughout our lives in all areas. And we want to exercise and we want to eat a healthy diet, right? We want to do these self-care practices. And all to kind of help keep us balanced when we're connecting with our kids. And then we have to connect with our kids and figure out how to do that. One of the strategies I like most is from the Gottman Institute, the work of John Gottman. It's called Bids and Turning Towards. The idea of a bid is that it's basically anything, any effort to get positive attention or affirmation or connection from someone else. So when your kid sits a little closer to you on the couch than they ordinarily do, that's a bid. If your kid asks if you want to play a game or play catch or go for a walk, that's a bid. If they run over to you and like slap you on the shoulder and yell, tag, you're it, and then run away, that's a bid. We want to turn towards these bids, right? We want to acknowledge that they happened. If we can say yes to this bid, we want to say yes. So yes, let's play catch. Yes, we can go watch a movie or go out for a walk or get ice cream. And if we can't say yes to the request, we want to at least acknowledge the bid. I would love to play catch with you, but I can't do that right now. At the moment, I have to go to a meeting in 10 minutes. But once that meeting is over, I'm happy to go play catch, and I really can't wait. What we don't want to do is turn away from the bid. We don't want to disregard it or ignore it. that can be a little tricky for people with ADHD, because sometimes it seems like we're ignoring things when really it's just that we're not attending in the way that we would prefer. And we missed the bid. We didn't ignore it. We just missed it. And we need to be tuned into that, be aware that that's a risk. And if our kid is talking to us, do our best to tune in and maybe say to them, give me a second. I want to pay attention to what you're saying to me, but I'm a little distracted at the moment. And then work through whatever's distracting us and then tune in. And we especially don't want to turn against that bid. We don't want to like say, why would I want to play catch with you? You're terrible at it. That's mean. I don't really expect that anyone watching this video does that. But to be thorough, I thought I'd mention it. Another piece to this is, just as we are expected to sort of help around the house and get stuff done, whether it's chores or work, we want our kids to be able to do that stuff too. And we have to set those expectations now. Men are doing that more than in the past, when men sort of went to work and came home and that was about it. Now we're enforcing these chores and things. And to help with that, it's important to remember that kids do well when they can. So if your kid is not doing as well as you would like, odds are there's a skill set that's missing or a resource that's missing. Your kid is doing their best. So if they're not meeting your expectations, instead of assuming they're being disrespectful or they don't care or they're unmotivated, all things that we ADHD people don't like hearing, because we know it's not accurate. Instead, let's assume that they need to be skilled up. Maybe the expectations need to be lowered temporarily and then slowly increased as our kids get more skillful and can meet the expectations at a higher level, until they meet it at the level that we would like to see them meeting those expectations at. And that means we have to communicate effectively, and we need to be able to plan effectively. And also circling back to that emotional regulation. When we start to take things personal, that's often because our emotions are getting dysregulated. So if we can instead say, all right, yep, my kid wants to please me, my kid wants to do well, they're not, that means I need to change my expectations. We will get further with that. We'll have a much stronger relationship with our kids. And that's really what the expectations for fathers are now, that we have those stronger relationships with our kids.
Hey everyone, I am Shane Threpp of Creating Order from Chaos and Operations Director for the Men's ADHD Support Group nonprofit. And what I really wanted to talk about today is men's role in the workplace, especially neurodivergent men. In many cases, the work that we do doesn't really follow along the lines of the nature of our brains, especially neurodivergent men. It often doesn't allow us to follow our passions, and it causes a lot of stress for us whenever it comes to our work-life balance. We get too wrapped up in the concept that we need to make money, and we forget that a lot of the work that we need to be doing needs to follow a very specific style of thought process. You have to remember that when it comes to people with ADHD, when we aren't following our passions, when we aren't looking at the novelty and the interest and the way that things are being challenging for us, and if we don't have that urgency that a lot of us need in the work that we do, we start to feel really lost, especially whenever you take into consideration that a lot of us were taught from an early age that we are supposed to work these singular jobs for 30 years until we retire with that watch and that pension. And that's often not the case for neurodivergent men. A lot of times we spend an inordinate amount of time bouncing from job to job. This isn't a flaw. This is a feature. This is actually how we work. For a lot of my youth, I bounced from job to job to job. I would get bored and I would start to self-sabotage. I would get annoyed by bosses who wouldn't get it. I'd see the solutions to the problems and I'd offer them, but because I was some 20-year-old kid, often I was overlooked and ignored. And that caused me really to feel a lot of frustration and anger. And I stopped enjoying work. It wasn't until I started learning about project management when I started figuring out my role in the work that I enjoy doing was roughly around 3 to 8 months. I'd go into a job, find out everything there was about a job, and work, then I'd get bored, and then I'd self-sabotage. So what I discovered whenever I learned about project management was freelancing project management, where I did short-term contracts. And when I did that, I found myself really starting to understand how to market myself as an employee. I started really looking at the work that I wanted to do for the companies that I wanted to work for. And I started going after those jobs after building a skill set that matched my values and my strengths and took into consideration my weaknesses. So when you're out there and you're looking for work, don't work for money. Work for your passions. Find those things that you really enjoy and really make sure that you're following that interest-based mindset that a lot of us have, that Dr. Bill Dodson talks about. Develop a work schedule that really takes into consideration rest and incorporate that into what you do. A lot of people with ADHD deal with delayed circadian sleep rhythms. And what we have to understand is the work that we do often is not going to be some, 7 to 4 position. It's not going to be some 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or anything like that. It's going to be slightly different. A lot of people with ADHD find themselves working second shift jobs or overnight positions. You may be one of those people, and that's okay. There's a lot of work out there that fits you. Another thing is we need to make sure that we're recognizing that money will come when we focus on finding work and careers that we actually enjoy. And we also need to understand that shifting positions within a workplace or shifting jobs or even our careers is a normal part of how we work. When it comes to work in ADHD, we really have to find our own path and follow it wherever it's going to lead us.
Hi, my name is Kristin. I am an educational leader and nonprofit professional focused on youth development. I am a board member of the Men's ADHD Support Group, and I am a Black queer man from the Bronx. And I love that. I am coming to you to talk to you about two things. Just my identity as a queer Black man and how I navigate that as a person with ADHD, and a little bit of the education system. How do those two things connect? We're going to find out all together at the same time. So one thing that I think about in my own journey and in my own life is how when we think about education, and the reason why I became an educator is because that was the first system that structurally failed me and a lot of young men in our country and just globally, because we have this idea about men as people who perform in sports. We have an expectation for them to be excellent there. We have an expectation for them to be academically excellent. And we want them to be quiet and sit down and be in one place. And I don't know anybody who can do that. But that was the expectation for myself and my peers. And I imagine it was the expectation for anybody who's listening to this. And a lot of the work that I do now is encouraging the men who've come out of that violent system, and also providing tools for young people and educators to make sure that never happens again. So that's my work and my focus. And, as a queer person with ADHD, right, we think about, there's two closets, right, you're in. And you're in the closet of your own identity, and you're in the closet of just being in a room, right? Being in a room and being unseen twice. And so one of the biggest things that I think we can do as a community and a society to help young men from any standpoint is to redefine what masculinity is and what we expect when we ask men to show up, and converting that from individual who needs to produce, needs to make money, needs to perform, needs to be a good good doctor, good lawyer, good dad, to somebody who is just whole, to somebody who's just authentically themselves. We don't encourage young men to pursue their talents, pursue their goals, pursue their dreams. We ask them to come to whatever reality we think is appropriate for them based off of our standards, whether it be a neurotypical standard, a structural standard. We ask them to show up to a system that we don't even meet the mark at. But one thing that I think we can all collectively do as people and community is, besides redefining that masculinity and that expectation, is to also think about and reframe what our ideas around mental health are. We have young men who we see that they're hurting, we're seeing that they're masking, we're seeing that they cope with these systems, but we're also perpetuating that by shaming what mental health could be, but then puzzled as to why we see what we see in the news and in our homes and the conversations that we have. But we're fostering that when we tell them that they don't need to show up as themselves. So I always try to dispel that kind of like hypocrisy. And one thing that I like to talk to parents about as well is like being advocates for their children, whether when they are neurodivergent or when they are queer, and when they do come to you with that information, and ensuring and being their advocate, right? Not just in the home, but also in the classroom too, making sure that they have the accommodations that are being met for them, whether that be extra time, whether that be fidget, what you see or what you witness in your home, how you see your child thriving in your home space. That should be everywhere. Your child should be thriving everywhere. So I encourage that. And I encourage educators to get wise, so to speak, about professional developments and different learning opportunities where it comes to young people with ADHD, not just teaching in the same way, but teaching in different ways as our techniques can plateau. And I want people to be mindful of their classrooms and mindful for the young men in their communities and being the people that they wanted when they grew up. I'm definitely stealing that from the group, but I've heard it before then. So we're all stealing from each other, but in a good way. And I hope within community, and I hope as parents, I hope as leaders, that we can solve the issue of men's mental health before it becomes men's mental health, when it becomes boys' mental health and young men's mental health. And that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Hey, everyone. I am here with the Men's ADHD Support Group, specifically Mark Almodovar, Brendan Mahan, Shane Thrapp, and Kristin Moten. Welcome, guys. Thanks for that. That was fantastic. We had a little bit of a earlier talk in the first shorts program that was talking about men and anger and vulnerability. So I think this is just a really great way to wrap up the day. I'm going to start off with a couple questions. Chat, if you have any for them, go ahead and ask. But first, and this is maybe for whoever feels like taking this one, but you talk about how it's important to show vulnerability. What do you think vulnerability actually does for men that's going to benefit them?
I kind of want to touch this one real quick. Vulnerability allows us to show the people around us that we appreciate them. And I'll give you an example. My social anxiety, the international conference is coming up in a few weeks, and this is one of those places where I get to see Mark, and I get to see Brendan, and I get to see Kristin, and my social anxiety is losing its mind. And I told them, I'm like, hey, I'm going to need y'all to kind of just let me hang out with y'all and let y'all do the intros and start the conversations, because I don't want to be the introvert in a room who sits on the corner or sits on the wall. I want to be in the mix, but I need to feel safe enough to be able to be in the mix. And this team, this group of men, have always made me feel safe. And so knowing I have them and being able to ask that of them is also me just a way to show my appreciation for the fact that they do make me feel that safe. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people out there I wish they had more of that. And that's one of the reasons why we do what we do.
Yeah, I loved how you were saying too that this group of guys is a safe place for you, right? This is a really good support group. Do you, or does anybody here have maybe some opinions or suggestions on how to make sure something's safe? Because I think I've seen a lot of men that, especially in the culture that we are raised in, or this toxic masculinity, that's a really hot button word, really has a fear of maybe even understanding what a safe place is, or how to find one, or how to ask if a place is, how they can feel safe to do so.
Can I pop in? Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
I think some of it is it just takes somebody to start it, right? Like I have a D&D game that I play monthly with some guys that I've known for 30 years, right? Like I've known these guys forever. Longer than that maybe. And it's gotten to the point where we start the game and I'll ask something and they'll give me grief about it. They'll be like, Brendan's asking about emotions again. But we talk about that stuff now because since I started doing this work, I've gotten more comfortable in those places. So now I ask the deeper, more meaningful questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so to some degree, I think it just someone's got to start asking those questions, and you'll find out, right? Like it doesn't. Someone takes the risk, and is it safe to ask the questions or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's not, you don't. You stop. But or you're me, and you have ADHD, and you ask anyway until they answer, and it takes months, and it's not a big deal. But I think another piece to this is, and I'm speculating wildly here, and I'll tell you why. I don't drink. Like I don't. It's not a thing that I do, but I have friends who drink, and I've been to parties where men are drunk, and they're all of a sudden they have emotional conversations because the alcohol doesn't let them hold it in anymore, right? So I think men sometimes assume it's not safe when actually it is. It's just it feels risky to start it, but everybody can go there if they have a guide, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
To kind of add on this real quick, and then go ahead and we'll have Mark answer this one. I'm ready for him to jump in. But what, there's probably a lot of men out there that might be hearing this, or, I'm part of the men's ADHD group on Facebook, and I've seen some men that kind of steer away from this idea because, and I think at the last conference, we got into a conversation with someone that just didn't see the value in this and looked at it as a sign of weakness. So what would you say to someone who sees things like kindness, vulnerability, someone apologizing when they're wrong? What would you say to someone that sees that as a weakness?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I remember that discussion. That was crazy. But as far as that goes, I think that my view is that men who think like that almost kind of contradict themselves because they're thinking that they have to provide this look of strength all the time and do well in their careers and do well in their marriage and everything like that. But then when they're bottling up their emotions and just setting themselves up to explode, like we see a lot in the men's ADHD support group, that typically leads to struggles in their career, divorce, sometimes even worse things. I don't even want to say, but like it's kind of like your original sense of what you thought you had to be. You're not even achieving that because you're putting so much energy into masking as opposed to some type of healthy expression. And at the end of the day, too, I mean, the fact is it's beyond the gender discussion. I mean, we're just human beings at the end of the day. We're not robots. We have feelings. We should feel them. And when we put ourselves in safe spaces, like for me, I am that person that is a super ambitious go-getter. I probably do overwork myself a little bit, but that's not what we're discussing at this ADHDvCon. And Shane's nodding his head, and I'm trying to look away from him right now. But at the end of the day, when I make the space to not just provide this type of thing, but to have friends like Shane and Christian and Brendan, when I make space for that, I am better at the things that I do as a result. That sounds like a win to me.
Yeah, and I want to add to this. So pattern recognition, one of my things, right? I love patterns. One of the other things I really enjoy doing is not enjoy, but it makes me sad a little bit, is I watch a lot of guys who come into the group. And when we first see them, it may be a comment about how sharing emotions is weak or things of that nature, or, there's just this very bravado that they come into the group with. And a lot of people share, sharing emotions is great, and then we actually see not the deterioration, but the track of vulnerability start to show itself because they test the waters with a comment and somebody says da da da, and somebody shows some support and love for what they said. Then we see a post about my wife is talking about leaving me, or they make something and it's a little bit more vulnerability, and they get a lot of love and support. And then, like, 6 months down the road, it's like, look, today has just been the worst place. Everybody can y'all just share some memes with me that just make me feel better, because I am just having a shit day. You know what I mean? And like, we see it all the time. We see it 100,000 times. And it's sad, because I wish people had that safety all the time, but it makes me feel good too, because it shows that we are doing a good thing there.
Yeah, I love that. I want to direct this next thing real quick. Brendan, do you have something?
I just throw something out real quick, because I'm having one of those thoughts that I have sometimes. I think it's important that, because I don't think men do this enough. I think it's important that men draw a distinction between not being vulnerable, not allowing themselves to be vulnerable because they personally can't handle it, and not allowing themselves to be vulnerable because in this moment, the people that I care for and the people that I lead will not be served by my vulnerability, and they'll be better served by my strength, so I can lead them. And I don't mean strength like aggression and cruelty or anything like that. I just mean my fortitude, my ability to withstand, right? And I think men sometimes think they're being strong for others when really they're being weak in not being able to be vulnerable. Does that make sense? Like, it's a personal thing as opposed to a leadership
No, I think too, what's really great is, and you see it, I think, when you guys talk to different men, and I've seen it personally in my own life, when you are sharing your own emotions and you see other people do the same thing, you actually get a really good example of it working out, right? You get to learn and grow and become a better man. I think what's so great about what the Men's ADHD Support Group does is, like you said, you're not just here going, men's only club, right? Like, ew, girls. And it's really you guys going, we need to show up as better men for everyone. We want to make this place safe, so that we can be better for other people. Because right now, and I'm sure all of you share this, as a whole, when you take a step back, it is getting better, but we're not, right? We're seeing some really unfortunate things. And so you giving a place for them is great. I did want to ask Kristin a question, because I can't speak to your experience, and I love your vulnerability and sharing, and saying that as a Black man and as a queer Black man, I'm sure, especially growing up in the Bronx. I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, and I like to think that I'm tough, but I could just imagine how much harder it is for you and what your experience has been in your life to come to where you are now. I'd love to hear even more on that, and then I do have another question for you.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting, right? Because we're talking, the broader concept is kind of like masculinity and the vulnerability, right? And so, like, I could either, I get presented with the choice, like, I can maneuver in this world and in this life 2 different ways. I could lie to myself, and I can kind of like continue to kind of like do that, like that thing for like, do the machismo act, and I'd probably do a pretty good job at acting. I feel like I'm a good, like, I feel like I'm, have a good energy about me, but that doesn't really serve anybody. So like, I kind of sort of have to be vulnerable or be fake. And, it's coming from the Bronx, like I'm going to be everything but fake, honestly. So like, because you gotta, like, what I mean? Like, I can't. So, the thing that's weird about masculinity in that way is, like, I kind of have to be this guy anyway, right? So for me, like, I'm looking at men struggle with their masculinity, and I think a lot of people, like, what does it mean? Like, I grew up without a father. Some people grew up with fathers that might not have been like that role model for them. Some people have the role model, but the role model is negative. But this is like, these are all cycles that we're perpetuating. And so I feel like, with my own cognizance of my own awareness of myself, I get to kind of like dictate for that. But that's because I'm a marginalized individual in a lot of different aspects, right? If you don't, like, a lot of the thing about the group too is like we only hear like the stories when the shit hits the fan, right? We're not coming to the situation because we're so incentivized. Somehow we've been fooled to think like, if I'm doing it the hard way, if I'm doing it by myself, you know, somehow I'm better for it. But who succeeds like that? Where has that ever existed in the history of anything where someone just makes it up often? Like that's not real. And so I think the vulnerability is admitting, hey, this facade that I put up to myself, I'm not arriving at. I don't believe, and I don't need to know whether or not somebody else is arriving at theirs for me to figure out my own self. So for me, because because the structure and my reality forces me to do that, I'm like, okay. And as an educator, so for me, I'm like, okay, how do I make this not so hard for the person behind me? And that's where my work starts. But for me, it's just like, I'm going to be vulnerable, but I don't have to live somewhere shitty. So like, how do I go ahead and I move and you know, do things that I need to do? Excuse my language. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, man. I talk about being authentic, right? I do wanna just ask, maybe as like a tip to end on this for you, Kristin. Like, if you know, do you have any advice for maybe parents or teachers that are watching, or you know, may be encountering people who are struggling to be authentic with themselves because they feel like they have to reach a certain type of expectation, right? Or what masculinity is for them? Like, how would you encourage them to be more empowering? And I think this too, beyond maybe someone that's marginalized, but also to look to the rest of you guys too. This might be a good question to think about for really anyone. But I would say specifically, to somebody that's coming from a marginalized place and struggling to be their authentic self.
I think you have what I would like for people who, and honestly, we're all neurodivergent here, right? So we already have something we already have something there about our lived experiences, right? And then just thinking about your intersections where they are. And for me, my work is like, hey, I want to make sure that the next person, I don't know about y'all, some of my comorbidities also lean to kind of like depression and anxiety. These are really bad feelings. And I feel like as an empathetic person, just by way of my experience, I don't want that for the next person. So how do I expend myself, and how do I run my space? How do I run my existence? But first I have to give that to myself. If I'm not giving that to myself, I'm not going to be able to give that to anybody else. So I would say for parents and teachers, get educated. I think there's a lot of rhetoric and conversations, but it's still okay to like analyze and think in for yourself about like, how do I move, and like what is going on with my child, or what is going on with my student. I think you can talk to the person, but then you're also giving them labor. I think educating yourself, talking to people around you, I think looking at resources. There's support groups for parents who have kids who have all these different. We are a Facebook group, you know what I mean? So
right?
they don't pay us, you know, the big bucks yet, but you know, there is a group for you, and then seek that out. I think the biggest thing that I want to champion is like, all this stuff doesn't exist alone. You have to have like people around. We just had a conversation last week about how we as a support group of board members and leaders need our own group where we're not just showing up for everybody, because we always have to be somebody. And we talk about not masking, but yet and still we're not being able to do that. So I think we need to allow those things for ourselves, and then once we receive that, be able to give that to anybody else. And that you could look like anybody, you could be any gender, and you could have any neurotype. I mean, if you can try.
Sure. I love that. Thank you. No, I love that. Before if we can get to, if you guys have thoughts on that, great. I do have a couple questions, and I'm looking at the time. I'm like, man, we could all talk for like an hour. So I just want to get in. This is a question specifically for Shane. How do we navigate that interest-based motivation when we are the primary provider for the family and we are looking at a complete career change?
So what do you have to do? So, okay. Yes, we are interest-based mindset. This is a really popular talk that Dr. Bill Dodson talks about in a lot of his things you can catch on our YouTube. shameless plug. No, but what you really have to understand about our interest-based mindsets is it doesn't necessarily mean that the things that we're interested in are the only things that we can do. It also means that we need to find the way to find the interesting in what we need to do as well, right? And you have to kind of balance those two different things. As far as like your career and things like that are concerned, you do not need to just necessarily look at all the work that you've done, but also look at your hobbies. Look at the things that you enjoy doing. Look at all of the work that you've ever done and find the pieces of all of those jobs that you've always enjoyed, and then find out what that looks like as a job on its own, right? Like, we have ChatGPT now, y'all. Like, take everything that you love doing, whether it's your hobby, it's like working at McDonald's, working at Burger King, flipping KFC, or if it's working in an office environment, doing this very specific things. Take your entire resume, pick out all the pieces that you enjoy, and put it into the ChatGPT and say, hey, what are careers or jobs that this looks like? And that'll narrow down your list, and it removes the confusion about what you enjoy doing. Because if that makes sense, now you can go look and see what those jobs actually are, how much they pay, and what qualifications that you need in order to do that. And it's all about doing that kind of like that little separation to find the things that you find interesting. Secondly, your interests are going to change, but there'll always be a theme. So my business is called Creating Order from Chaos. The reason it is because literally everything I do in every job, D&D game, or anything like that is I take the chaos that I come into and I create order out of it. I develop systems, processes. I destroy my DM's dreams of his ordered, campaign. It's all about finding all of those different things, and finding your theme is the most important aspect of it, because that theme is what you're almost always going to be interested in. And then that's what you've got to find, is that key right there.
I like how you mentioned too that like it's not necessarily, there's going to be jobs that you do that maybe you don't find the thing interesting, but finding ways to make it more interesting, right? Like, even as me, someone that enjoys this job, I have to do parts of it that suck. I have to do like admin work, things that take a lot of really the joy out of me, and I still make it fun somehow, right? So listening to music or whatever that is. And then also to the hobbies thing, I think is really important for people to realize that, depending on your situation, you may have to work at a job that might not be your favorite, but find other ways to give you that joy, because I think that's like your gas tank, right? And it's like, as long as you're filling that up, you have a better chance of operating in other areas. That's great. We've got a couple minutes, guys. You're all great. Is there anything maybe to touch on? I'll cut you off in 2 minutes. So anybody got like 20 seconds each or something like that to kind of go ahead? I know. Go for it, Mark.
I'll say something. If I can give one tip to all ADHDers on the planet, which I assume are watching this like every single.
That's what's happening. Yeah, we're missing like 3.
But for me, I think that it's really important, whether you find it through the Men's ADHD Support Group or ADHDvCon or my bestie Jay or Ron or anyone here. It's really, really important that you find these safe spaces that are out there for you, and understand that when you're doing this work of navigating ADHD, it's very, very important that you look into the way that you speak about yourself. To me, the best, beyond the Pomodoro technique, or some other ADHD hack, to me, the ultimate thing that any ADHDer can learn is the ability to look at themselves in the mirror and appreciate what they see. You owe it to yourself to learn to speak to you owe it to yourself to learn how to speak to yourself, to produce that feeling, but also to surround yourself with people that will be there when you have your head down and say, like, nah, bro, you got this, man.
Nice.
Things like that go a long way.
Yeah, that was. We've literally talked about that. I think in like 2 or 3 of the talks we've had today. It's so great.
Nice.
Does anybody have anything else want to finish this up? Go ahead.
Yeah, can I? I think that a piece of this, that a thing that gets confused with manhood, when a lot of the time is leadership. I think those two things get mushed together a lot, both appropriately and inappropriately, right? And it speaks to what Kristin was talking about earlier about, as leaders in the men's ADHD support group, the leaders need to be able to fall apart sometimes because right? Like, of course, because everybody's vulnerable at some point. But as leaders, you've got to be careful about where that fall apart happens. Because if it's happening in front of the people that you're leading and causing them to feel unsafe and undermining their ability to follow you and trust you, that's not great, right? And that's part of the value of a group for men and that supports men, is it lets men go where you don't have to be careful because you don't want to upset your wife or your kids or your employees or whatever, right? Like, you get to go to this place where you get to struggle and you get to be vulnerable and you get to admit that things are hard. And I just think that it's important that men recognize that we need that. We need to be able to go, hey, things are hard and I'm struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't make me less of a leader. It doesn't make me less of a father. It doesn't make me less of an employer. It doesn't make me less of a husband. It doesn't make me less of a man. It just means that things are hard. That's all that it means. And I might need to be careful about where I express that and with whom, but that doesn't mean that I can't show that vulnerability. I just have to figure out where, which is sort of circling us back to the start of this conversation.
I love that. You guys.
Mic drop.
Yeah, I would say you guys are fantastic. I love what you do for the community. You guys can check them out on their Facebook group, Men's ADHD Support Group on Facebook. And each of them, individual ways of reaching, I think we have on our website. But just in kind of conclusion of the whole day, I also want to just thank you all for watching and being a part of ADHDvCon Day 1. We're going to be back here tomorrow for Day 2, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, for another great lineup of awesome talks and awesome people. And thank you guys for supporting. We'll see you tomorrow.
Definitely.
All right.
All right,
See you guys.
Later.